Hey everyone, welcome back to another unit guide for Godzilla Battle Line. And today we will be going over Space Godzilla as a leader and as a unit. But before we get into that, I just need to say one little thing regarding the last how-to video. In the last video, I said that my Mega Gearus was not having success against other flying units. Now, a lot of people in the comments hit me up and they were like, hey, I'm actually doing really well with Mega Gearus against flying units. So I did a little upgrading of my own, and I can say for sure that Mega Gearus at a high enough level, like maybe around level 20, is going to do really well against Ghidorahs and Rodans. Mothra can still out DPS, but you're going to do a really solid amount of damage on Mothra. So I don't want to spend too much time on this because this is a Space Godzilla video, not a Mega Gearus video. However, if your Mega Gearus is up at a high enough level, you are going to have great success with her against flying units. Now, with that out of the way, let's jump right into the unit that this is actually about, Space Godzilla. To start us off, I want to talk about Space Godzilla as a leader. Now, he has an ability called Photon Field, which costs 2 energy and has a 2-minute cooldown. This ability spawns 6 crystals randomly on the battlefield and increases damage dealt by allied units near the crystal by 20%. So I'm actually a really big fan of this ability. I do think though it is lackluster. I really like that there are buff pillars basically all around the field for your units to get a little bit more damage out of. I think the worst part about this ability and what really prevents me from choosing Space Godzilla as a leader is the randomness of the crystals. If I could go into maybe a sub menu in the deck section and select where I want my crystals to spawn, that could be huge. Like I could make a wall around myself or wall in like the enemy leader, or make a little puzzle slash maze that could be in the middle of the field that the enemy's gonna have a tough time getting through and my units are gonna benefit from. But because it's a randomly generated placement of the 6 crystals, it may work really well for you, or it may just be a waste of 2 energies. So it's a real toss-up, and in my personal experience, I've very rarely ever lost to Space Godzilla leaders, and that's in part because as a leader, his health and damage are pretty average, and since, you know, he's a 4-star and he's a leader, he is part of the ever-expanding 4-star pool, and especially as a leader, guaranteeing that you're going to get Space Godzilla from any of the maps is really not consistent. So to use him as a leader when you could be using Mechagodzilla or Gigan instead, I prefer the 3-star leaders because they are easier to level up and get better leader stats on. So you can refresh your store, your daily sales section every day as many times as you possibly can to get the possibility of finding Space Godzilla there for 25,000 coins. Just know that he is pretty average across the board as a leader, and it's going to be a lot harder to find him through maps as opposed to maybe getting a 3-star leader. Oh, now on to my preferred way of using Space Godzilla, and that is as a unit. So I've already just mentioned that he's a 4-star, but as a unit he costs 6 energy to place on the field. So as Space Godzilla moves on the board, he summons a pair of crystals on both sides of him, left and right side of him. The 2 crystals will last for 25 seconds and they do not attack any targets. The crystals, however, do provide an attack buff for 5 seconds to friendly units that are close to them, and that is identified by when they spawn. There's a little ring that they show, and then any units in there will receive the damage buff. Now I want to make a note real quick before I go in and breaking down the crystal stats, that when the ring disappears, that does not mean the buff has gone away. If you have a unit that walks near the crystals within the time allotted that buff is up, they will benefit from it. So if the crystals go up and they have a 5-second buff time, if your unit walks in there at the 3-second mark, they're getting 2 seconds of buff. So just because that ring has disappeared doesn't mean your units can't still benefit from that buff. I also want to talk about the crystal stats real quick, because on the stats page when you view Space Godzilla as a unit, it says that the crystals have a 125% attack boost. This is wrong. It's actually a 25% attack boost, and the way the game calculates it, it's like each attack is doing 125% of the attack value. So you would take the attack value times 1.25 and you would get the damage that you're actually doing. It's not 125%, it is a 25%. So how do we use Space Godzilla as a unit? Well, Space Godzilla is very helpful on the field for the fact that his crystals are considered facilities within the game's hierarchy. So characters that choose buildings to attack over other units will attack these crystals instead of Space Godzilla, and it'll buy you some time. Godzilla 89, for example, he loves to go after buildings, right? We've all noticed that if you have a building on your side of the field by the leader, he's going to go for that before he attacks your leader. Well, crystals work the same way. If Godzilla 89 is approaching Space Godzilla and those crystals are still on the board, those crystals are going to be hit before Space Godzilla is hit, or at least the one crystal on whatever side of Space Godzilla that G89 would be on. Next, Space Godzilla has like decent damage and a kind of low to medium health and not too much range, so he's good on his own, but you should really consider him as a buff machine first and a damage dealer second. So pairing Space Godzilla with additional units can be a bit expensive just because of his high cost of 6 energy. However, the damage output of having multiple units being buffed by the crystals is definitely making that cost worth it. That expense is really going to pay off in the long run when you're just pumping out tons and tons of damage. Another thing we should probably talk about before we get into the strategies of using Space Godzilla are his crystals. So we've already talked about the boost that they give, right? So I already talked about how the crystals will buy you some time, right? And we've already talked about the buff that they give, right? Well, you should probably also know that once the crystals are spawned, they will be on the field for 25 seconds at max before they despawn. If they are not already destroyed, they'll just despawn themselves. But after one pair of crystals is spawned, 9 seconds later, the next pair will spawn. This means you can have multiple pairs of crystals on the board, so the longer you keep Space Godzilla alive and the more he is moving, you can just spawn a wall of crystals. I don't know if the footage will be in this video or not, but I literally had a match where Space Godzilla made a pathway, like a highway, straight from my side all the way to the other side of the map, and he basically just highwayed some of my units straight to the leader. It was super insane, and if I can do that again, I'll try to include that. But just know that you can have multiple pairs of crystals on the board at once, and this can be absolutely huge for playing defense. So now it's time to talk about some of the strategies you can be using when you have Space Godzilla on the field. Pairing Space Godzilla with a second unit is the best way to take advantage of his passive ability. While the buff does help Space Godzilla output a lot more damage than he normally can dish out, having multiple units buffed on the field can be overwhelming to any opponent. The energy collector is also extremely useful in any Space Godzilla deck. Getting a little bit of that extra energy will help you put stronger units on the field faster. So, Godzilla 89 is an amazing unit overall, right? He has been for a long time. And he's the best tank in the game. Probably, you could argue, one of the best units in the game. So, having Godzilla 89 stand in front of Space Godzilla while the crystals buff the both of them will make it an uphill battle for other monsters trying to get through that wall. You know, while Space Godzilla is taking down air units or even hitting some range from behind Godzilla 89, 89 is taking the brunt of the attacks, and he's keeping those crystals alive, keeping that buff alive, and keeping Space Godzilla alive because he can always get a new pair of crystals out and get a new buff. Likewise, using Godzilla Ultima next to Space Godzilla will give you an incredibly powerful ranged attack. Do not put Ultima behind Space Godzilla because he may stop to attack and fall out of the range of the crystals, like the next set of crystals that are spawning, so you're going to want to put Ultima on Space Godzilla's flank. This way, if he stops to attacking, he can just walk up, right up to the next pair of crystals and get that buff again. But if he falls behind and then he's behind Space Godzilla again, he might not be within range of that crystals just because Space Godzilla is so huge. He might keep Ultima out of range just based on his sheer length alone. So those are just two units that I'm finding really incredible success with using Space Godzilla in tandem with them. And, you know, don't feel limited to just those characters. There are plenty of units in this game to choose from, so try experimenting with them. It doesn't matter if they're flying, a facility, or whatnot. The only characters, or I should say units, that aren't going to benefit from Space Godzilla's crystals are objects like the freezing sundae or the missiles or the train bomb. Those aren't units on the field, so they're not going to get a buff. But flying units, you know, land-based units that are going to go straight for the leader, stuff like that, as long as they're close to the crystals, they'll benefit from it. So play with all the units that you have at your disposal and see who works best for you in your deck with Space Godzilla. I'm seeing a lot of success with Mega Gearus in Space Godzilla because she does great work in the air and he does great work covering her back and giving her the buff. So, you know, experiment. There's lots of units to use and the buff applies to pretty much everyone. So now for the last part of the video is what characters does Space Godzilla counter and what characters counter him. First up is the rushdown units King Caesar and Mothra Leo. Now, the way their ability works is that they are going to do a massive rush attack that's going to hit for a ton of damage, but the way they prioritize target is whatever target is closest to them when they are within range. So, as long as your crystals from Space Godzilla are ahead of Space Godzilla or any of your other units, this is going to mean that the crystals will take the big rush attack from King Caesar and Mothra Leo, and once that attack is used up and that damage has been expelled from them, they are going to be so much slower and more susceptible to attacks than they would have when they were in the rush ability. So this is a great way to get those units to stop what they are doing, especially because King Caesar has been seeing a ton of play. Next is Gigan and the Stealth Bomber. Now, both of these units go straight for your leader, right? Wrong. Both of them have the ability to target facilities, and like I've said multiple times in this video, the crystals count as facilities. So as long as the crystals are on the path of Gigan and the Stealth Bomber, those two enemies will go out of their way to hit those crystals before they make their way to your leader. This is great to distract those units and let the other characters on your board maybe get in more damage on them than they would have been able to in the first place. I know Gigan, when he's running down the field, right, your unit may hit him once and then stop because Gigan is out of range. Well, because he's going to make a detour for the crystals, it may give your team more opportunity to take him down before he reaches your leader. And likewise, because we're talking about crystal distractions, Godzilla 89 and Ultima. These units target and prioritize the buildings first before other units, and these are probably two of the best units in the game, period. So just like King Caesar, Mothra Leo, and Gigan and the Bomber, use the crystals to distract Godzilla 89 and Ultima. They'll prioritize the crystals if they're already on the field, but once they start attacking a unit and those crystals go up, it's not going to matter. Once they're on a target, they are on that target until one of them dies. Now, this isn't to say Space Godzilla isn't good in his own right and that he's just strong against all these characters because his crystals basically stop them from doing what they're supposed to be doing, but he is pretty mediocre damage, pretty mediocre health. He is good and he is good attacking in the air, right? So he can hit air units, he can hit ground units, but I believe Space Godzilla is better as a utility character than a damage dealing character, and making use of his crystals is probably the best things you could possibly do when he is on your team. Finally, let's talk about units that counter Space Godzilla. Now, I said before that Space Godzilla is going to counter G89. Well, G89 is also a great counter to Space Godzilla because, like I said earlier, Space Godzilla kind of doesn't have the best health and attack, right? So if you have a pretty low Space Godzilla, mine is level 6. That's not nothing to laugh at, right? But every time that my Space Godzilla comes up against the Godzilla 89, he gets absolutely rinsed in just a few hits. Godzilla 89 is probably one of the best units in the game for damage and health, and Space Godzilla just cannot compete with the kind of brute force that G89 brings to the field. Next are the characters that can hit multiple targets at once, so Hedorah, Jet Jaguar, and King Ghidorah. All of these units can not only hit Space Godzilla, but simultaneously destroy his crystals. They basically can nullify Space Godzilla in just a few hits. Those crystals go up, they do an attack, those crystals are down, and Space Godzilla is vulnerable. So these three characters are probably the best characters, in my opinion, for taking down Space Godzilla specifically if you see him on the board, because they can hit the crystals and him and whatever units are close to the crystals that are making use of that buff. Because since you need to have your units kind of clustered around Space Godzilla, or at least around those crystals, having an enemy on the board that can hit multiple units at once, like the three that are on screen right now, can be extremely detrimental to any Space Godzilla team composition. Last but not least is the swarm units. So the swarm units are not really seeing too much play, right? But I know the level 2 energy Kamacuras is seeing play currently still, so I just wanted to put them on this list because yes, there's a lot of them, and since Space Godzilla is a single target attacker, they can take down his crystals and then him, or just one crystal and then him, or go for him and what have you. There's just so many of them. They can definitely take down his crystals and get good hits on Space Godzilla before he either kills them all or he kills them. So Space Godzilla is alone, he is super vulnerable and susceptible to large group attacks, so the swarms actually do pretty well against Space Godzilla. And there you have it. This might be the longest how-to guide I have, but I thought it was important because Space Godzilla can bring so much to the table if you use him properly. Thank you guys so much for watching, and if there's another unit you want to see a guide on, let me know in the comments down below. I'll catch you all in the next one. Bye bye.